Let us drift into the world of philosophy, as if into a soft, warm current that embraces our thoughts and allows them to float in perfect freedom. Today, our journey will carry us to the very origins of one of the most profound ideas from the ancient world, the idea of anamnesis. This word, which sounds so mysterious and so enigmatic, holds within itself the key to understanding how we truly acquire knowledge, who we are in our deepest essence, and what our place might be within the boundless expanse of the universe. Prepare yourself for a gentle immersion, for we will slowly unveil its meanings, as if unrolling a delicate and ancient scroll. Imagine for a moment ancient Greece, a time when words themselves possessed a special gravity, their roots growing deep within the rich soil of myth, of poetry, and of everyday existence. It is from this very earth that the term anamnesis emerges. This word is not simply a scholarly term. It breathes with history, and it resonates with wisdom. If we were to carefully separate it into its component parts, we would find the prefix ana, which signifies again, back, or upward, in the root menis, which derives from the verb mnemnesco, meaning to remember, to recall. Thus, in a very literal sense, anamnesis means remembering again, a restoration in memory, or a recollection. This is not the simple act of recalling a forgotten date or a name. It is something infinitely deeper, something that relates to the very essence of our being. But before we delve into the depths of Platonic philosophy, where anamnesis finds its most complete and beautiful expression, let us first gaze back into the time before Plato. In that period, philosophical thought was only just beginning to take shape, moving away from a mythological worldview and searching for rational explanations of the cosmos. Although the term anamnesis, in the specific sense that Plato would later use it, had not yet been clearly formulated, the idea of recollection as a source of knowing was already echoing within certain philosophical schools. One of the most influential currents that paved the way for an understanding of anamnesis was that of the Pythagoreans. This was not merely a school of philosophers, but an entire brotherhood that intertwined mathematics, music, astronomy, and mystical teachings. For the Pythagoreans, the world was permeated by the harmony of numbers, and they believed that the human soul was immortal, passing through countless reincarnations. In this context, knowledge was not something to be acquired from the outside through sensory experience. Instead, it was perceived as the restoration of that which the soul already knew from its previous existences or from a time before its incarnation. The Pythagoreans placed great importance on music, which in their view had the power to harmonize the soul and lead it to an understanding of the cosmic order. Perhaps it was precisely through music, through its mathematical structure and its emotional influence, that the soul could recollect its true nature and the universal truths. They believed that certain states of consciousness, induced by meditation or rituals, could assist the soul in recovering this lost knowledge. This was a prototype of the idea that deep, genuine knowledge already resides within us, simply awaiting its own awakening. Another significant source for Plato was the Orphic Mysteries. Orphism was a religio-philosophical movement that also held a belief in the soul's immortality, its transmigration, and the possibility of its purification. In Orphism, the soul was seen as divine in origin, but entrapped within the body, as if in a prison. The purpose of Orphic rites and practices was to liberate the soul from this confinement and facilitate its return to its divine state. In this context, knowledge and truth were not merely intellectual understandings, but rather a spiritual awakening that allowed the soul to remember its divine origins and its unity with the world. Although this was a more mystical than rational understanding, it still contained the seed of the idea that truth is something internal, something revealed through specific processes or states of being. Thus, before Plato, the idea of recollecting knowledge was already present in the very air of ancient Greek thought, albeit in a less systematized form. The Pythagoreans and the Orphics laid the foundation upon which Plato would later construct his magnificent philosophical edifice. They presented the soul as something more than a mere function of the body, and suggested that knowledge is not solely the result of external experience. This prepared the ground for a more profound contemplation of the nature of knowledge and the nature of the soul itself. We can also find echoes of this idea in the early Greek poets, such as Hesiod and Homer, where mention is made of the muse of memory, Mnemosyne. Mnemosyne was the goddess of memory, the mother of the 9 muses, the patronesses of the arts and sciences. In this context, memory was not just a personal faculty for recalling the past, it was the wellspring of inspiration, wisdom, and knowledge. A poet, in appealing to the muses, was not simply asking for help in recounting events. He was asking to be reminded of truths that existed beyond his personal experience, truths that were part of a collective memory or even of divine knowledge. This bestowed upon memory an almost mystical, transcendent dimension. In the everyday language of the ancient Greeks, the word menses, memory recollection, was used to denote the ability to reproduce past events or learned information. However, Plato, in borrowing this word, imbued it with an entirely new, profound philosophical significance. He elevated it beyond the simple memory of a past life or accumulated experience, transforming it into a complete epistemological and metaphysical concept. Therefore, when we speak of anamnesis, we are not just contemplating a philosophical term, we are immersing ourselves in an ancient wisdom that whispers of the profound connection between the soul, knowledge, and being itself. Plato would take these disparate threads, the ideas of the soul's immortality, of innate knowledge, of the existence of truths independent of the sensory world, and weave them into the single brilliant tapestry of his theory of anamnesis. This tapestry would become one of the central elements of his grand philosophical system, allowing us to understand how we seemingly learn things that no one has ever taught us, and how within every soul, as if in an ancient silent library, all truths are already stored, patiently awaiting their awakening. This is the very first step on our philosophical journey, a step that leads toward understanding the mysteries of knowledge. Now that we have gently touched upon the roots of anamnesis and its ancient precursors, allow us to drift smoothly into the very heart of Plato's philosophy, the thinker who bestowed upon this idea its profound and fundamental meaning. Imagine that we are stepping into a magnificent yet deeply tranquil temple of thought, where each pillar supports a vast, overarching dome that symbolizes the wholeness of his worldview. To truly understand why Plato considered recollection to be the key to all knowledge, we must first come to perceive the 3 great pillars of his philosophy: his theory of ideas, his conception of the nature of the soul, and his distinction between true knowledge and shifting opinion. Let us begin with Plato's most grand and original contribution, his theory of ideas, or as it is often called, the theory of forms. Imagine, if you will, that our visible world, the world we perceive through our senses, is nothing more than a reflection, like shadows cast upon the wall of a cave. Beyond this cave, in the brilliant radiance of a true sun, there exists another world, the world of ideas. This is not some distant mystical dimension, but rather the essential reality that underlies everything we see and experience. In this world of ideas, there exist perfect, eternal, and unchanging ideas or forms. These are not mere abstract concepts within our minds. Plato regarded them as real, objective entities that serve as the models or blueprints for everything that exists in the sensory world. For example, when we see many beautiful things, a flower, a sunset, a work of art, what is it that makes them all beautiful? According to Plato, they are beautiful because they all participate in the singular idea of beauty. This idea of beauty exists in and of itself. It is perfect, unchangeable, eternal, and it is the source of all beauty in the world. Similarly, when we speak of justice, there exists a perfect idea of justice, which serves as the ideal for all just acts and laws. And reigning over all of this, like the highest sun that illuminates everything and gives being to all else, is the idea of the good. It is the source of truth, beauty, and existence for all other ideas. So what are the primary characteristics of these ideas? Asterisk, eternal and unchanging. Unlike the objects of the sensory world, which are born, transform, and perish, the ideas exist beyond time and are not subject to any change. The idea of a circle will always be a perfect circle, regardless of how imperfectly we draw circles on paper. Asterisk perfect. The ideas are the perfect exemplars of their counterparts in the sensory world. Any physical tree is merely an imperfect reflection of the perfect idea of the tree. Asterisk non-spatial. The ideas do not exist in space. They possess no physical location. Asterisk objective. The ideas exist independently of our minds or our thoughts about them. They are not subjective constructs of our intellect. Asterisk originals, paradigms. They are the primary archetypes, and the things in the sensory world are their copies or reflections. And most crucially for our discussion, Plato maintained that these ideas are the true objects of knowledge. We cannot attain genuine, certain knowledge of the fleeting things in the sensory world, for they are in a constant state of flux. True knowledge is only possible when we turn our intellect toward that which is eternal and unchanging, toward the ideas. They are the lighthouse that guides us through the fog of sensory perception and into the pure clarity of truth. Following the world of ideas, the second great pillar that supports the theory of anamnesis is the Platonic conception of the soul. For Plato, the soul is not merely breath or a life force. It is something far grander, far more intricate. Plato considered the soul to be immortal, to have pre-existed its physical form, and to be entirely distinct from the body. Imagine the soul as a celestial wanderer, a being that existed long before it found itself confined within a human body. Prior to its incarnation in the flesh, the soul resided in this world of ideas. There, like a perfect and unimpeded spectator, it had the capacity to directly contemplate these eternal, flawless ideas. The idea of beauty, the idea of justice, the idea of the good, and countless others. This was its original home, its true state of being. It absorbed this knowledge as a sponge absorbs water, not through any sensory perception, but through direct intellectual apprehension. However, when the soul becomes incarnate within a body, this experience of direct contemplation of the ideas is forgotten. The body, with all its needs and its sensory perceptions, acts as a kind of veil or shroud, shielding the soul from its primordial knowledge. It is like a sudden awakening in an unfamiliar place after a very long sleep, when the memories of where you were before grow dim or vanish completely. Plato often compared the body to a prison for the soul, and the sensory world to an illusory reality that distracts the soul from its true purpose. But why, precisely, does the nature of the soul allow it to grasp the ideas, in contrast to the body? Plato asserted that the soul, by its very nature, is akin to the ideas. It is a part of that same divine non-material realm. The body, on the other hand, being material, changeable, and imperfect, cannot possibly apprehend the non-material and perfect ideas. The body perceives only shadows, mere reflections, whereas the soul, by virtue of its non-material essence and its pre-existent experience, is the sole instrument capable of perceiving the true forms of being. It is this pre-existent nature of the soul, its contemplation of the ideas before incarnation, that serves as the crucial element explaining the mechanism of anamnesis. Knowledge does not come to us from the outside. It is already held within us, like an ancient treasure waiting to be unearthed. The soul, like a once locked chest, contains within itself all knowledge of the ideas. The process of learning, according to Plato, does not consist in placing new knowledge into the soul, but in awakening the knowledge that it already possesses. It is like rousing from a dream, as memories that seemed lost gradually return. Thus, the soul is not simply a rational principle, but also the bearer of eternal truths. Its immortality and pre-existent nature are the necessary conditions that allow us to have access to universal truths, which could never be derived from the transient sensory world. It is the very thing that connects us to the world of ideas, the very bridge across which we may return to true and certain knowledge. The third fundamental aspect of Plato's philosophy, without which it is impossible to grasp the significance of anamnesis, is his clear and sharp distinction between knowledge and opinion. This distinction is critically important, as it explains why Plato rejected sensory experience as a source of true knowledge, and why he sought another path to truth. Imagine two people. One is looking at a reflection in a rippling puddle, and the other is looking directly at the sun. The one who gazes into the puddle sees only a shifting, distorted reflection. Their knowledge of the sun will be imprecise and unreliable. The one who looks directly at the sun in an allegorical sense, of course, so as not to harm the eyes, apprehends its true nature. For Plato, sensory experience is like looking at the reflection in that puddle. Our senses, sight, hearing, touch, and so on, provide us with information about the physical world. This world is in constant flux, impermanent and imperfect. Things within it come into being and pass away. They change their properties. For instance, the very same object might seem beautiful to one person and unattractive to another, hot at one moment and cold the next. Because of this changeability and relativity, Plato argued that sensory experience can only ever lead to opinion. Opinion doxa is our understanding of the world that is founded upon perception. It can be correct or mistaken, but it is always unstable, subjective, and prone to change. It is like believing in the reality of the shadows on the cave wall. You might believe they are real objects, but this is merely an appearance, not the truth. Opinion is based on sensory impressions and therefore cannot be the source of absolute universal truth. It is like a belief in something that is based on a personal impression rather than on a deep understanding. In contrast, true knowledge, episteme, represents a completely different plane of understanding. It is stable, universal, objective, and unchanging. It pertains to that which is true always and everywhere, regardless of our personal perceptions. True knowledge is possible only when we turn our intellect toward that which is eternal and constant, toward the ideas. It is like the knowledge that 2 plus 2 equals 4. This is a truth that does not depend on who is doing the calculation, or where, or when. It is universal. Plato believed that genuine knowledge cannot be acquired by observing the sensory world, because this world is only a pale imitation of the true reality. If we aspire to true knowledge, we must turn away from the shifting phenomena of the world and turn toward the eternal essences, the ideas. So why does sensory experience lead only to opinion, while true knowledge comes from apprehending the ideas? Asterisk flux versus permanence. The sensory world is constantly changing, so any knowledge based upon it will be temporary and unstable. The ideas, however, are unchanging, and so knowledge of them is stable. Asterisk imperfection versus perfection. Sensory objects are imperfect copies. Knowledge of them is therefore imperfect. The ideas are perfect, and knowledge of them is true and complete. Asterisk relativity versus objectivity. The perception of sensory objects is often relative and subjective. The ideas, however, are objective and universal. It is precisely here that anamnesis enters the stage. If true knowledge cannot be obtained from the sensory world, and if our soul has already seen these ideas prior to its incarnation, then the only path to genuine knowledge is through recollection. Learning, philosophical inquiry, dialectic, all of this is not about discovering something new, but about recollecting what the soul already knows, but which was forgotten through the trauma of birth and the immersion into a body. It is like awakening an ancient memory, one that was buried deep, but is still alive in the depths of consciousness. Thus, for Plato, true knowledge is not the accumulation of information, but the awakening of an inner light, the uncovering of a pre-existing truth. His philosophy creates a holistic picture where the world of ideas, the immortal soul, and the distinction between knowledge and opinion are all interconnected. This interconnectedness makes anamnesis not just an interesting hypothesis, but the central mechanism that allows a human being to attain true knowledge and ultimately a virtuous life. It is an invitation to an inner journey, to a search for truth, not somewhere in the world outside, but deep within oneself, in the infinite silent spaces of one's own soul. We have already peered into the majestic world of Platonic ideas and have come to grasp the special nature of the soul. Now the time has come to witness how Plato masterfully weaves these concepts into one of his most compelling arguments in favor of anamnesis. To do this, we will embark upon a journey into one of his most famous dialogues, the Meno. This is a dialogue where Plato does not simply state his theory, but rather demonstrates it in action, vividly showing how truth can be awakened within the soul. Imagine that we are sitting there beside Socrates and his companions, listening to their discourse and observing their quiet discoveries. The Meno dialogue begins with what seems to be a simple question: can virtue be taught, or is it acquired through practice, or is it given by nature, or does it come about in some other way? This question concerning the nature of virtue swiftly leads to a more fundamental question about the nature of knowledge itself. Meno, a young and self-assured aristocrat, believes he knows the answer to this question, but Socrates, as is his way, skillfully dismantles his illusions, showing Meno that he does not truly understand what he is speaking of. The conversation reaches an impasse when Meno puts forth the famous paradox of inquiry, also known as Meno's paradox. It sounds something like this. How can you search for something when you do not know what it is? For if you do not know it, you will not recognize that you have found it when you stumble upon it. And if you already know it, then why would you need to search for it? This paradox seems to negate the very possibility of learning and inquiry. If we do not know what we are looking for, we cannot search. If we already know, the search is pointless. It is like trying to find something in a pitch-dark room without knowing what it is you are seeking, or else searching for that which you already hold in your hands. This paradox of Meno's calls into question the very nature of cognition and seems insurmountable. It is at this very moment, in order to resolve the paradox and to show that learning and the search for knowledge are indeed possible, that Socrates introduces the concept of anamnesis, of recollection. He asserts that the soul already possesses all knowledge, but has forgotten it. Therefore, learning is not the acquisition of something new, but merely the recollection of that which already exists within the soul. In order to illustrate this radical idea, Socrates turns to the celebrated experiment with the slave boy. Imagine the scene. Socrates asks Meno to call over one of his slaves, a boy who has never studied geometry and who has, it would seem, no formal education whatsoever. This is a crucial point. Plato intentionally chooses someone who could not possibly have obtained this knowledge through teaching or worldly experience. Socrates begins by asking the boy simple questions about a square. He draws a square in the dirt and asks, "Here is a square with a side of 2 feet. What is its area?" The boy, who understands basic concepts, answers, 4 square feet. Socrates continues, "What if we wanted to have a square that is twice as large in area, that is 8 square feet?" The boy at first intuitively answers that one must simply double the side of the square, making it 4 feet. But when Socrates draws a square with a side of 4 feet, it becomes clear that its area is 16 square feet, not 8. This demonstrates that simply doubling the side does not work. The boy understands his error, which is the first step toward true knowledge, the recognition of one's own ignorance. Then Socrates continues to pose questions, never giving him direct answers, but only guiding his thought. He begins to draw another figure. He takes the first square, then adds 3 more identical squares to it, forming a large square with a side of 4 feet, which, as we have already seen, has an area of 16. Next, Socrates asks the boy to look at the diagonals of these 4 smaller squares. When he draws the diagonals inside each of the 4 small squares, they form a new larger square in the center. Socrates asks the boy, "What are you looking at? What kind of square do these lines form?" The boy sees that this too is a square. And of what figures is it composed? Socrates asks. The boy sees that the new square is composed of 4 triangles, which are the halves of the 4 smaller squares. Each small square had an area of 4, so half is 2. 4 such triangles yield an area of 8. Thus, Through a series of guiding questions, Socrates does not give the boy ready-made knowledge, but merely helps him to elicit the geometric truth that a square constructed on the diagonal of another square will have double the area. The boy, who had never studied geometry, arrives at an understanding of a complex mathematical principle. He does not receive knowledge from an external source, but rather seems to discover it from within himself. Socrates emphasizes that he only asked questions. He did not teach the boy found the answer himself. This is the very heart of the experiment with the slave boy. It serves as a living demonstration of anamnesis. Plato argues that if the boy, possessing no formal education, was able to discover this truth on his own, it can only mean one thing. The knowledge was already within him. It was simply waiting to be awakened. This knowledge was not the result of sensory experience. He never saw a perfect square, and it was not the result of teaching no one had taught him. It was innate, an inherent part of his soul. After the successful demonstration with the slave boy, Socrates returns to Meno's paradox. Let us recall its form. How can one search for that which one does not know? And why search for that which one already knows? Plato, speaking through the character of Socrates, offers an anamnesis as the direct solution to this very paradox. Asterisk, we are not searching for that which we are entirely ignorant of. This refutes the first part of the paradox. If we knew absolutely nothing about the object of our search, then it would indeed be impossible to find it, or even to recognize that we had found it. But Plato asserts that we are not a blank slate, tabula rasa, upon which nothing has been written. Our soul, being immortal, and having existed prior to its incarnation, already possesses all of the ideas, even though this knowledge has been forgotten. Therefore, when we search for knowledge, we are not truly searching for something absolutely unknown. We are searching for that which is already hidden deep within us. We are searching for something about which our soul has a dim, forgotten notion. It is like searching for a lost key within your own home. You know that it is somewhere, and you search for it because you know it exists, even if you do not remember precisely where you placed it. An asterisk. We are not searching for that which we already fully know. This refutes the second part of the paradox. If we already possessed all knowledge in a full and conscious way, there would be no need for any search. But although the soul possesses all knowledge of the ideas, this knowledge is not conscious or accessible to it. While in its incarnate state, it is forgotten, concealed. Therefore, we do indeed search for knowledge, but this search is not about acquiring something new, but about recollecting something old, something that already exists. It is like untangling a knot of threads. The threads are already there, but they must be carefully unraveled to see the complete and coherent picture. In this way, anamnesis resolves Meno's paradox by asserting that the process of learning is neither the assimilation of something entirely new from the outside, nor is it a pointless search for what is already obvious. It is a process of restoring knowledge that is already contained within the soul. Socrates says in the Meno that the soul has learned everything, and that all nature is akin. This means that by recollecting one truth, we can, through logical connections, go on to recollect all the others. The experiment with the slave boy is a brilliant illustration of this idea. The boy did not receive information from Socrates. He was merely guided toward it through questioning. Socrates acts in the role of a midwife, a practitioner of Meditics, helping the soul to give birth to the knowledge that is already gestating within it. This knowledge of mathematical, and therefore universal and unchanging, truths could not have been gained empirically, since we never see a perfect square or a perfect triangle in the sensory world. It can only be a memory of the perfect form. This dialogue, the meno, serves as a cornerstone for understanding anamnesis, as it not only introduces the concept, but also offers an empirical, albeit philosophical, proof of its existence. It shows that we are not merely passive receivers of information, but active subjects, capable of unlocking the vast potential of knowledge that already resides within us. It is an invitation to self-discovery, to the search for truth not in the external world, but in the very depths of one's own soul, which is a boundless repository of eternal ideas. If in the Meno dialogue Plato first demonstrates the idea of an amnesis through the practical example of the slave boy, in the Phaedo he unfolds it much more broadly, using it as one of the central arguments for the immortality of the soul. The Phaedo is a dialogue that describes the final hours of Socrates' life, his conversations with his students before his execution. It is an exceptionally emotional and profound text, where philosophical arguments about the soul's immortality are interwoven with the themes of death and the afterlife. In this atmosphere of farewell and contemplation of the eternal, the concept of an amnesis takes on a special gravity. It becomes not just a way to explain how we acquire knowledge, but a foundation for the belief in the indestructibility of our very essence. Imagine that you are standing on the bank of a great river that flows through time. You watch as various things appear and then vanish in its waters, yet the river itself remains. In the same way, in the Phaedo dialogue, Plato seeks to show that while the body is mortal and subject to decay, the soul, much like the river, is eternal and continues on its journey. Central to the argument for the soul's immortality in the Phaedo is the consideration that we, as human beings, possess the ability to apprehend eternal and unchanging ideas, such as the idea of beauty, the idea of equality, the idea of justice, the idea of the good, and so forth. Plato asserts that these ideas cannot possibly be derived from the sensory world, because in the world we perceive, there is nothing that is absolutely equal, absolutely beautiful, or absolutely just. Everything we see is merely an imperfect copy or a reflection of these ideas. Let us consider this through the example of the idea of equality. When we see two seemingly identical objects, for instance, two sticks that appear to us to be equal, we might think that this is equality itself. But Plato asks, do two absolutely perfectly equal sticks exist anywhere in the sensory world? Even if they appear so at first glance, upon more careful measurement, some minuscule difference will always be revealed. Furthermore, these sticks can be broken, can rot, can be burned. That is, they change and they perish. And yet, we understand the very idea of equality as something perfect, unchanging, and eternal. We know what it means to be equal, even when we do not see a perfect example of equality in the world. From where, then, do we have this knowledge of perfect equality if we have never encountered it in the sensory world? Plato argues that we could not have obtained this knowledge from experience, since sensory experience provides us only with imperfect examples. Therefore, this knowledge must have been acquired before our birth, when our soul resided outside the body and was able to directly contemplate these perfect ideas. Here is the logical chain of Plato's argument. We possess knowledge of absolute perfect ideas, such as absolute beauty, absolute equality, absolute goodness. These ideas do not exist in the sensory world in their perfect form. Everything we see is merely an imperfect reflection of these ideas. No sensory object is perfectly round, perfectly just, and so on. Therefore, we could not have derived this knowledge from sensory experience. Our experience only shows us the copies, not the originals. This means we must have acquired this knowledge before our birth, before our soul was incarnated in a body. It dwelled in the world of ideas and directly contemplated them. The acquisition of this knowledge before birth implies that the soul existed before the birth of the body. This proves the pre-existence of the soul. And if the soul existed before birth and the knowledge of the ideas is eternal, then the soul as the bearer of this knowledge must also be immortal. It is akin to the ideas, which are eternal, and is therefore eternal itself. This is precisely how an anamnesis becomes not just an explanation for the process of cognition, but a key proof of the soul's immortality. If we recollect knowledge, it means we must have already possessed it, and if we possessed it before our birth, then our soul must have existed before it was united with the body, and if it had access to the eternal ideas, then it is itself eternal, not subject to death. Plato emphasizes here that the soul, unlike the body, is unchanging in its nature, similar to the ideas, and for this reason it cannot be destroyed. Continuing this line of thought in the Phaedo, Plato explains precisely how the process of recognizing imperfect earthly copies occurs through the recollection of the perfect ideas. It is similar to a situation in which you see someone's portrait and understand that it is a portrait, even if it is not a perfect copy of the original. You can judge how well or how poorly it is rendered only because you already possess a concept of the original, the person it depicts. Plato asserts that when we encounter objects in the sensory world, which are only imperfect reflections of the ideas, our soul, upon seeing these flawed copies, responds with memories of the perfect originals. For example, asterisks. We see many beautiful things, a beautiful flower, a beautiful statue, a beautiful person. Not one of them is absolute beauty itself, but we are able to recognize them as beautiful because they awaken within our soul a memory of the perfect idea of beauty, which our soul contemplated before its incarnation. It is like listening to music that is not perfect, but is lovely. It reminds us of the idea of a perfect harmony. Asterisks. We see many seemingly equal objects, 2 equal planks, 2 equal weights, but we know that they are not perfectly equal, and we are able to compare them to the ideal of equality that is preserved within our soul. It is like seeing an imperfect circle, yet understanding that it strives toward the perfect idea of the circle. Asterisks. We see acts that are just or unjust. We are able to evaluate them because an imprint of the idea of justice exists within our soul. In this way, sensory objects act as catalysts for recollection. They are not the source of knowledge, but they facilitate its awakening. This is much like how an external stimulus, a scent, a sound, an image, can suddenly evoke a long-forgotten memory. The soul, upon encountering imperfect copies, seems to remember or recognize their perfect prototypes, which are stored in its deepest vaults. For most people, this process occurs on an unconscious level. We are not always aware that our judgments about beauty or equality are grounded in the recollection of ideas. However, according to Plato, it is precisely thanks to this unconscious, intuitive recollection that we are able to navigate the world, recognize forms, make evaluations, and strive for perfection. The philosopher, by using dialectic, the method of questions and answers, as Socrates did, can help the soul to undertake this recollection in a more conscious and purposeful way. Therefore, in the Phaedo, Plato not only confirms and expands upon the concept of anamnesis, but also employs it as a powerful argument for the immortality of the soul. This transforms anamnesis from an epistemological mechanism, how we know, into a metaphysical truth, who we are. A soul that is capable of recollecting eternal ideas must itself be eternal. It is not merely a product of the body, but is an essence that existed before birth and will continue to exist after death. This idea offers comfort to those who fear death, asserting that the death of the body is not an end, but merely a liberation of the soul from its temporary prison, allowing it to return to its true eternal home, the world of ideas, where it can once again contemplate truth in all its purity. This line of reasoning imbues the Phaedo dialogue with a light of hope and a faith in the infinite nature of the human spirit. After the profound reflections on the soul's immortality in the Phaedo, we now turn to the Phaedrus' dialogue, a text that stands as one of the most poetic and imaginative in the entire Platonic corpus. The idea of an amnesis is revealed through the vivid myth of the charioteer, and takes on a new, dynamic dimension through a discussion of the role of erotic love, eros, as a powerful catalyst for recollection. Imagine not a somber dialogue in a prison, but a leisurely stroll along a riverbank, beneath the shade of a plane tree, where the beauty of nature inspires sublime thoughts on the beauty of the soul and of the ideas themselves. In the Phaedrus, Plato uses the beautiful and complex myth of the charioteer to explain the nature of the soul and its connection to the world of ideas before its incarnation in a body. This myth is not a literal description, but rather an allegory that helps us to grasp non-material and complex truths. Imagine the soul as a chariot, drawn by two winged horses and guided by a charioteer. Asterisk. The charioteer symbolizes reason, logos, that part of the soul which strives for truth and wisdom and which directs its other parts. Asterisk. One horse, white and noble, symbolizes the soul's honorable passions, its spirit, thumos, such as honor, courage, the drive for victory, a sense of shame and pride. This is the part that is naturally drawn toward goodness and beauty. Asterisk. The other horse, black and unruly, symbolizes the lower sensual desires and passions, epithumia, such as hunger, thirst, sexual urges, and bodily pleasures. This horse constantly pulls the chariot downward toward earthly gratifications. The souls of the gods, with their perfect charioteers and horses, are able to easily guide their chariots and dwell perpetually in the celestial sphere, where they contemplate the pure, perfect ideas. They circle the heavens, from time to time ascending to the rim of heaven and beholding that which is beyond heaven, that is the world of ideas. This is the place where true essences exist, unchanging, colorless, formless, intangible, visible only to the intellect. The souls of humans, with their more complex and not always obedient horses, also try to follow the gods. However, due to the constant struggle between the noble and the unruly horse, it is very difficult for human souls to ascend to the rim of heaven and fully contemplate the ideas. Only a few souls, those with a strong charioteer, that is a developed intellect, and well-trained horses, can for a moment rise up and see at least a part of the true reality. The others fall, either because the black horse prevails and drags them downward, or because they cannot keep pace with the gods. During this celestial contemplation, the soul that has managed to at least partially see the ideas gathers knowledge of true being. It sees the idea of beauty in itself, the idea of justice, the idea of the good. This is not merely a visual perception, but an intellectual apprehension of essence. But when a soul, through its own incapacity or the unruliness of its horses, loses its wings and falls to the earth, it becomes incarnated in a body. This moment of incarnation is accompanied by a forgetting of what it saw in the celestial sphere. The knowledge of the ideas that it possessed becomes hidden, like a deeply buried treasure. Depending on how many of the ideas a soul saw in its celestial flight, it becomes incarnated in the body of a philosopher, a king, a poet, an artisan, and so on. The soul of a philosopher, for example, saw the most ideas, and so its earthly life will be the most conducive to recollection. This myth underscores several key points. Asterisk, the pre-existence of the soul. The soul existed before birth and had its own experiences in a non-physical world. Asterisk, direct access to the ideas. Before incarnation, the soul had the opportunity to directly contemplate the ideas, which makes this knowledge innate. Asterisk, forgetting upon incarnation. Birth leads to forgetting, but not to the complete destruction of knowledge. Asterisk, a hierarchy of souls. Different souls saw a different number of ideas, which influences their inclinations and potential in their earthly lives. Thus, the myth of the charioteer gives us a vivid, figurative explanation of how exactly the soul acquired its knowledge of the ideas before its incarnation. It makes the idea of anamnesis more tangible and understandable, showing it not merely as a philosophical hypothesis, but as part of the soul's cosmic journey. The Phaedrus not only tells us about the soul's past journey, but also offers a mechanism that can help the soul to remember what it saw. And this mechanism is none other than erotic love, or eros. It is crucial to understand that for Plato, eros is not simply physical passion, although that is its lowest manifestation. Platonic eros is a profound, all-encompassing yearning of the soul for beauty, for goodness, and ultimately, for truth. It is a powerful driving force capable of elevating the soul from the earthly to the divine. Plato explains that when a soul, which once contemplated the idea of beauty in the celestial sphere, becomes incarnated in a body, it forgets this vision. However, when it encounters beauty in the sensory world, for example, a beautiful person, a work of art, a magnificent landscape, this serves as a catalyst for recollection. Imagine that beauty is the spark that ignites the flame of a long-forgotten memory. When we see something extraordinarily beautiful, we experience not just aesthetic pleasure, but a deep inner shock, a thrill, a sense of awe. Plato describes this sensation as the sprouting of wings on the soul. This is no accident, for the soul, having lost its wings when it fell to earth, begins to feel them being restored when it is stirred by beauty. Why does beauty, specifically, have such power? Plato asserts that of all the ideas the soul contemplated in the heavens, the idea of beauty was the most radiant and the most accessible to its apprehension. Therefore, when the soul encounters its echo in the earthly world, this echo proves to be the most potent stimulus for recollection. Sensual beauty, though imperfect, is the most direct and accessible reflection of the ideal, divine beauty. The process of recollection through eros occurs in stages, like ascending a ladder. 1. Initial attraction to physical beauty, A person is first captivated by the physical beauty of a single individual. This awakens within them the memory of the idea of beauty. 2. Realization of the beauty in many bodies. Then the person begins to understand that beauty exists in many bodies, and that the beauty of the soul is higher than the beauty of the body. This expands their understanding of beauty. 3. Transition to the beauty of souls and laws. Next, Eros directs them toward the beauty of souls, of moral actions, of laws and customs, which are more stable and more perfect. 4. Yearning for the beauty of knowledge. Then the person begins to appreciate the beauty of knowledge, of the sciences, and of ideas. 5. Finally, the apprehension of the idea of beauty itself. At the highest rung, the soul, elevated by Eros, is able to recollect and directly contemplate the idea of beauty itself, the eternal, unchanging, perfect essence that is the source of all beauty in the world. This is a moment of true enlightenment, when the soul returns to its original state of contemplating the ideas. Thus, for Plato, Eros is not just a feeling, but a driving force that compels the soul toward philosophical inquiry, toward the cognition of truth. It is a powerful impulse that allows the soul to rise above the sensory world and to recollect its divine origin in its knowledge. It is a kind of philosophical magnet, drawing the soul toward its true source. Thanks to Eros, a person not only recollects the ideas, but also purifies their soul, making it better and more like the divine ideas themselves. In this way, in the Phaedrus' dialogue, Plato not only deepens our understanding of Anamnesis through the myth of the charioteer, but also shows how this process can be activated and amplified through the human experience of erotic love. This makes Anamnesis not just an abstract philosophical concept, but a living, dynamic part of human existence, tied to the soul's deepest yearnings for beauty, truth, and perfection. It is an invitation not merely to think, but also to feel, allowing the beauty of the world to become a signpost toward our own inner forgotten knowledge. We have journeyed through the depths of Platonic thought, from the genesis of the idea of Anamnesis to its manifestations in myths and arguments for the soul's immortality. Now that we understand that true knowledge already resides within us, a logical question arises: how can we awaken it? How can the soul, immersed in the body and distracted by the sensory world, recollect its primordial experience of contemplating the ideas? Plato proposes several pathways or methods of recollection, each of which serves as a unique guide for the soul in its striving for truth. These methods are not merely intellectual exercises, but life practices that allow us to rise above the mundane and draw closer to the realm of the eternal. If Plato speaks of anamnesis as recollection, then for him dialectic is the principal instrument of that recollection. Imagine that the soul is an ancient scroll upon which all truths are inscribed, but this scroll is tangled, covered in dust, and requires careful unrolling. Dialectic is the art of unrolling this scroll, of gradually revealing truth through meticulous inquiry and the posing of questions. In Plato's philosophy, dialectic is not simply the skill of argumentation. It is the art of conducting a philosophical dialogue, one which is based on constant questioning, the analysis of answers, the identification of contradictions, and the refinement of concepts. Its goal is not victory in a dispute, but the shared search for truth. It was Socrates, Plato's teacher, who was the master of dialectic, and Plato, in his dialogues, perfectly demonstrates this method. Recall the experiment with the slave boy in the Meno. Socrates did not give the boy ready-made answers. He only asked questions that compelled the boy to think, to reconsider his errors, to become aware of his own ignorance, and then, step by step, to arrive at a correct understanding. This is the very essence of dialectic. It helps the soul to turn away from sensory perceptions and turn toward the ideas. How does it work? 1. Beginning with sensory judgments. Dialectic often begins with a discussion of some everyday concepts or sensory judgments. For example, we might begin by discussing what we consider to be just in our daily lives, revealing contradictions and imperfections by posing questions such as, what is justice? Is this always just? What are the exceptions? The dialectician helps their interlocutor to identify the imperfections, contradictions, and limitations of their initial notions, which are based on sensory experience or commonly held opinions. This is like stripping away the false convictions that prevent one from seeing the truth, ascending above the sensory, realizing that sensory examples do not provide a complete and universal understanding. The soul begins to search for something more stable and perfect. It begins to turn away from the shifting world of phenomena. 4. Guiding toward universal concepts. Dialectic gradually leads the mind toward more abstract, universal concepts. We cease to speak of a single just act and begin to contemplate justice itself. 5. Recollecting the ideas. This process of intellectual ascent helps the soul to recollect the perfect ideas, which are the source of truth for all sensory manifestations. This is not merely an intellectual understanding, but an intuitive apprehension that is accompanied by a feeling of illumination, of recognition. Dialectic is a method that demands an active mind. It forces us not just to passively receive information, but to actively reflect, analyze, and synthesize. It is like a journey into the mountains, where every step upward reveals new, broader vistas. Every successful dialogue, where the participants truly get to the heart of the matter, is an act of collective anamnesis. Plato believed that only through dialectic can a philosopher ascend to the highest ideas, particularly to the idea of the good, which is the source of all knowledge and being. Dialectic is the highest science, which makes it possible to see the interconnectedness of all ideas, their harmonious structure. It is the light that disperses the shadows of the sensory world and allows the soul to see the true sun of truth. Furthermore, dialectic helps the soul to purify itself of the false notions and prejudices it accumulates while dwelling in the body and interacting with the sensory world. This purification allows the soul to become more receptive to eternal truths. It does not simply recollect, but also liberates itself from illusions. This method is fundamental to understanding Platonic education. It does not consist of filling empty vessels with knowledge, but of guiding the soul so that it may find its own way to the truth that is already latent within it. It is like showing the way to a traveler who is lost but possesses a map. They must walk the path themselves, but they need a sense of direction. This is precisely why Plato believed that true philosophers must rule the state, for only they, having apprehended the idea of the good through dialectic, are capable of seeing true justice and guiding society toward its true good. Thus, dialectic is not just a conversation, but a purposeful, intellectual journey that demands patience, logic, and a yearning for truth. It is the bridge that connects our earthly sensory experience with the eternal world of ideas, allowing the soul to remember its true origin and to unlock its limitless potential. It is a powerful instrument that transforms ignorance into knowledge and doubt into illumination. Continuing our journey through the methods of anamnesis, we now turn to another key aspect of Platonic thought, the role of education and upbringing. For Plato, education is not simply the transmission of information or a set of skills. It is a much deeper process that aims to guide the human soul toward truth, toward the cognition of the idea of the good. Imagine education as a form of meticulous gardening. One cannot simply toss seeds onto the ground and wait for a harvest. One must prepare the soil, provide light and water, and carefully prune away the unnecessary so that the plant may grow in the right direction and bear good fruit. It is the same with the soul. It requires a proper upbringing to unlock its potential for recollection. Plato believed that true education must be a process of turning the soul away from the shadows of the sensory world and toward the light of the ideas. He illustrates this vividly in his famous allegory of the cave from the Republic dialogue. Recall how the prisoners, who have spent their entire lives seeing only shadows on the cave wall, are gradually acclimated to the light when they are led outside. This ascent into the open, this gradual adaptation to the radiance of the true sun, is a metaphor for a proper education. What role, then, does a proper education play in guiding the soul toward true knowledge? Turning from the sensory world, the world of sensory experience, though important for daily life, is for Plato a source of shifting opinions, not of true knowledge. Education must help a person turn away from an excessive dependence on sensory perceptions, which can distract and distort reality. This does not mean ignoring the sensory world, but rather positioning it correctly as a source of hints about the ideas, not as the ideas themselves. Developing the mind's faculties. Education must develop the rational faculties of the soul, its capacity for logical thought, abstraction, analysis, and synthesis. This is achieved through the study of sciences that may not seem to have a direct connection to the ideas, but are excellent training for the mind. Plato particularly emphasized the importance of arithmetic and geometry. These sciences compel the mind to work with abstract concepts, numbers, figures that do not exist in a perfect form in the sensory world. When we contemplate a perfect triangle or a perfect circle, we do not see them with our eyes, we see them with our mind. This forces the soul to recollect the perfect ideas of these mathematical objects that it once knew. They are a bridge between the sensory and the intelligible world. Astronomy. The study of the motion of celestial bodies, though it appears empirical, should, in Plato's view, inspire the mind to search for the mathematical harmony and order that underlies the cosmos, not merely to observe the stars. Music. Music, with its harmony and rhythm, has the power to bring order to the soul, to develop its aesthetic sense, and to attune it to the perception of the cosmic harmony of the ideas. It awakens a sense of measure and proportion. Moral upbringing. In Plato's philosophy, education is inseparable from moral upbringing. For the soul to be able to recollect the ideas, especially the idea of the good, it must be pure and virtuous. An immoral way of life, an excessive indulgence in sensual desires, clouds the intellect and distracts the soul from its true purpose. Therefore, the cultivation of virtues, courage, moderation, justice, is an integral part of the educational process, helping the soul to focus on higher values. It is like cleaning the windows so that light may freely enter, guiding toward dialectic. Ultimately, all of these stages of education prepare the soul for the highest method of cognition, dialectic. Only after the mind has been trained in the abstract sciences and the soul has been morally purified is it ready for the philosophical inquiry that allows it to directly recollect the ideas and apprehend their interconnectedness. Dialectic is the pinnacle of the educational process, the final point at which the soul attains true knowledge. Plato believed that education should not be a matter of compulsion, but a voluntary process under the guidance of experienced mentors. It should begin in childhood and gradually, step by step, elevate the soul to more complex levels of understanding. It is not the pouring of knowledge into the soul, but the unfolding of its innate capacities. Just as a sculptor liberates a form from a block of stone, so too does an educator help the soul to free itself from the shackles of ignorance and reveal its true nature. Thus, a proper education is, for Plato, vitally important for the activation of anamnesis. It creates the conditions under which the soul can turn away from the distracting factors of the sensory world, develop its intellectual and moral faculties, and ultimately return to the contemplation of the eternal ideas that are the source of all true knowledge. Without such a purposeful upbringing, the soul risks remaining captive to illusions and never realizing its true potential. Education, therefore, is not merely the transmission of facts, but the art of guiding the soul toward its own enlightenment. After the rigorous logic of dialectic and the systematic nature of education, we turn our gaze to a more sublime and emotional method of recollection through art and beauty. This theme, as we have already seen in the Phaedrus's dialogue, is one of Plato's most cherished. Imagine that you are standing before a masterpiece of art or contemplating the majesty of nature, and you feel your heart begin to beat faster as your soul experiences an inexplicable yearning for something higher. This is the very moment when beauty becomes a catalyst for anamnesis. Plato, though he was cautious of imitative art that merely copies the sensory world, recognized the potent influence of beauty as such. For him, beauty is not just a subjective feeling or a property of an object. The idea of beauty is an eternal, perfect, and objective essence in the world of ideas, the source of all the beauty that we see in the world. When we encounter beauty in the sensory world, it could be a beautiful melody, a majestic temple, a harmonious dance, or someone's beautiful face. It does not simply bring us pleasure. According to Plato, these earthly manifestations of beauty, though imperfect, are reflections or shadows of that perfect idea of beauty which our soul contemplated before its incarnation. It is like hearing the distant echo of a melody you once knew by heart. How exactly does an encounter with beauty serve as a catalyst for recollection? The awakening of the soul. Beauty possesses the unique ability to stir the soul on a profound level. It evokes not just an intellectual understanding, but an emotional response, a thrill, a sense of wonder. This feeling is a sign that the soul is recognizing something akin to itself, something that belongs to its primordial experience. It is like a gentle nudge that awakens sleeping memories. A hint of perfection. No earthly beauty is absolute. However, its ability to evoke such a deep feeling in us points to the existence of something perfect toward which it strives. When we see a beautiful person, we do not just see their physical features, we feel that they are a reflection of something greater, something ideal. It is a hint that directs our gaze beyond the visible, guiding toward the idea of beauty. Thanks to this recognition and this hint, the soul begins to yearn for the source of this beauty, for the idea of beauty itself. This occurs through the process described in the Symposiums and the Phaedrus as the ladder of love arrows. Beginning with a love for physical beauty, the soul gradually ascends to a love for the beauty of souls, the beauty of laws, the beauty of knowledge, and finally to the direct contemplation of the idea of beauty, which is eternal and unchanging. This ascent is an active process of recollection, purification and elevation. As the soul yearns for the idea of beauty, it is simultaneously purified of lower sensual passions. Beauty helps it to free itself from its dependence on the body and to direct its energy toward higher spiritual aspirations. It is like a powerful whirlwind that lifts leaves from the earth toward the heavens. Thus, art and beauty are not merely aesthetic categories, but powerful philosophical instruments for anamnesis. They are not the source of truth, but they are a measure of truth, helping the soul to recognize its lost knowledge. Through beauty, we feel a connection to a higher world. We remember our divine origin, and we are inspired to undertake the philosophical quest. This confirms that the path to knowledge does not always lie through dry logic. It can also be filled with inspiration, wonder, and a profound emotional experience that leads us to the truth that already lives within us. These three methods, dialectic, education, and beauty, are not mutually exclusive. They are mutually complementary. Dialectic provides the logical path, education prepares the mind, and beauty awakens the soul and points it in the right direction. Together, they form a holistic system that allows the human soul to travel the path from ignorance to true knowledge, from the sensory to the intelligible, from forgetting to profound recollection. This demonstrates Plato's faith in the infinite potential of the human soul and its innate ability to apprehend universal truths. Is it not a marvel that within each of us there already exists a vast repository of knowledge, simply waiting for its own awakening? We have explored the origins of anamnesis, its place within Platonic philosophy, and the methods by which the soul can awaken its forgotten knowledge. The time has now come to pause and contemplate the true significance this concept held for Plato and the consequences it had for the subsequent development of philosophical thought. Anamnesis is not merely an interesting idea, it is the cornerstone that supports the entire architecture of the Platonic worldview, with profound echoes in epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics. Imagine that anamnesis is a powerful key, one that unlocks not just a single door, but several doors at once to the understanding of being. The first and most apparent significance of anamnesis lies in its epistemological consequences. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that studies the nature, origin, and limits of knowledge. Before Plato, the question, how do we know what we know, was one of the most pressing. Sensory perception was unreliable, and pure thought, it seemed, could not create knowledge from nothing. Anamnesis offers Plato an ingenious solution to the question of how we acquire knowledge beyond empirical observation. Explaining innate ideas. Anamnesis provides an answer to the question of why we possess certain universal and necessary truths that cannot be fully derived from sensory experience. These include, for example, mathematical truths, 2 plus 2 equals 4, the properties of a triangle, logical principles, the law of non-contradiction, or even universal moral concepts. What is justice? Goodness. We never encounter a perfect triangle or absolute justice in the physical world. yet we understand these concepts and can make judgments about them. Anamnesis explains this as innate knowledge that the soul recollects rather than acquires from the outside. These truths are a part of the soul itself, of its original state. Overcoming Minnow's paradox. As we have already examined in detail, anamnesis directly responds to the paradox of inquiry. If knowledge is recollection, then we are not searching for something completely unknown, for the soul already knows it, nor are we searching for something we already fully know, for the knowledge is forgotten and needs to be awakened. In this way, the process of cognition becomes not pointless, but entirely possible and meaningful. Distinguishing knowledge from opinion. Anamnesis underscores the fundamental distinction between true knowledge and fleeting opinion. While opinion is based on inconsistent sensory experience, knowledge, which is the recollection of the ideas, is stable, universal, and objective. This allows Plato to substantiate the possibility of attaining absolute truth, which does not depend on individual perception or cultural specifics. The active role of the knowing subject. Anamnesis places immense importance on the inner activity of the one who knows. Knowledge is not poured into a passive soul, but drawn out from it. This makes the process of learning an act of independent discovery, not mere memorization. The philosopher or teacher becomes not one who gives knowledge, but one who helps the soul to give birth to it from within, the Meutics of Socrates. This imparts a deep personal meaning to the process of learning and stimulates self-discovery. Therefore, from an epistemological standpoint, anamnesis resolves several key problems concerning the nature of knowledge. It explains the origin of universal truths, substantiates the possibility of cognition, and emphasizes the active internal role of the soul in this process. This radically changes the view of learning, transforming it from the simple accumulation of information into a path of self-knowledge and the awakening of innate wisdom. Beyond the epistemological, anamnesis has profound metaphysical consequences. Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that studies the nature of being and reality. Anamnesis does not just explain how we know, it also confirms what it is we know and what truly exists. Reinforcing the reality of the world of ideas. If we can recollect the ideas, it implies that these ideas truly exist as objective entities independent of our perception. Anamnesis serves as a kind of proof of the existence of the world of ideas, as it explains from where we obtained our knowledge of these perfect forms. They are not the fruit of our imagination or abstraction. They are the real foundation of everything that exists. They are not mere concepts, but a higher form of being to which our soul has access. Confirming the soul's immortality and pre-existence. As we saw in the Phaedo, anamnesis is one of Plato's primary arguments for the immortality of the soul. If the soul recollects knowledge, then it must have acquired it before its birth, meaning it existed before its incarnation in a body, and if it had access to the eternal ideas, then its own nature must be eternal and indestructible. This elevates the soul to a level that transcends the material, making it a part of the divine intelligible world. The death of the body then becomes not an end, but a liberation, a return of the soul to its true state, and the possibility of a full contemplation of the ideas. Emphasizing the dualism of soul and body. Anamnesis reinforces the Platonic dualism, the distinction between the soul and the body. The body is material, mortal, a source of limitations and of forgetting. The soul, however, is non-material, immortal, the source of reason and knowledge. Their union is temporary, and their natures are fundamentally different. This has significant implications for understanding human nature and our purpose. We are not merely bodies, but immortal souls, temporarily imprisoned in a material world. Thus, the metaphysical consequences of anamnesis are immense. It not only substantiates the existence of another higher world of ideas, but also elevates the human soul to the level of an eternal, divine essence that has a direct connection to this higher reality. This opens the door to a deep understanding of the nature of being and humanity's place within it. In addition to the epistemological and metaphysical, anamnesis also carries profound ethical consequences. Ethics is the branch of philosophy that studies moral values and conduct. Plato closely linked knowledge with virtue, asserting that no one knowingly does evil. Therefore, if knowledge is a form of recollection, then virtue too can be recollected by comprehending the idea of the good. Asterisk virtue as knowledge. For Plato, true virtue is not simply adherence to rules or the cultivation of good habits. It is knowledge of what is truly good. If a person genuinely knows what justice, courage, and moderation are, they will act accordingly. Anamnesis posits that the idea of virtue, like the other ideas, is already latent within our soul. We do not learn morality from scratch. We recollect it by apprehending universal moral principles. Asterisk attaining the idea of the good. The highest of all ideas for Plato is the idea of the good. It is the source of all that is true, beautiful, and good. The cognition of the idea of the good is the highest degree of knowledge, and this knowledge is the absolute prerequisite for a virtuous life. If a philosopher, through dialectic and other methods, recollects the idea of the good, they cannot help but act in accordance with it. They see what is truly good for themselves, for others, and for society. Asterisk responsibility for moral choice. If knowledge of the good is already within us, this places a certain responsibility upon us. Our task is not to seek the good externally, but to awaken it from within ourselves. Criminality and immorality, according to Plato, arise not from malicious intent, but from ignorance, from a forgetting of the idea of the good. One who commits an evil act simply does not know what the true good is, or their soul is clouded by passions and distracted from a true vision. Asterisk the possibility of moral improvement. The concept of anamnesis offers hope for moral improvement. It means that every person, by possessing the idea of the good within their soul, can potentially become virtuous. This is not a matter of divine intervention or of chance, but the result of conscious effort directed at self-knowledge and recollection. Education and philosophical inquiry, as we have already discussed, are ethical instruments that help the soul to be purified and to recollect the idea of the good, and thus to become virtuous. In this way, the ethical consequences of anamnesis are closely intertwined with its epistemological and metaphysical aspects. It forges a powerful link between knowledge and virtue, asserting that the path to a moral life lies through the path to true knowledge, which is already located within us. This makes ethics not just a set of rules, but a deep internal process of self-knowledge and self-perfection. The influence of anamnesis and of Platonic philosophy in general cannot be overstated. It is like a mighty river that takes its source in ancient Greece and branches out into countless streams nourishing entire worldviews over the centuries. The idea of recollection has found its echo in many philosophical schools and religious currents, transforming and adapting to new contexts. Asterisk Neoplatonism, perhaps the most direct and immediate influence of Anamnesis, was on Neoplatonism, the philosophical current that arose in the 3rd century AD and was one of the most influential movements of late antiquity. Philosophers such as Plotinus developed the Platonic concept of the soul, its descent from and ascent to the One. For Plotinus, as for Plato, the soul yearns to return to its original source, to the One, which is analogous to Plato's idea of the good. The process of knowing and of the soul's return to the One was understood in large part as a recollection of its kinship with the divine. Plotinus views this process as an ascent from the sensory world to the intellectual, and further to a mystical union with the One. For him, knowledge is not something external, but the uncovering of an inner divine spark in the soul, which recollects its belonging to the One. Asterisk Early Christian thought. For example, Buddhist Platonism, and particularly the idea of anamnesis, had an enormous influence on the formation of early Christian theology. One of the most prominent Christian thinkers, Augustine of Hippo, was significantly shaped by Platonism and Neoplatonism before his conversion to Christianity, and this left a deep mark on his theology. Augustine, like Plato, believed that true knowledge of God and moral truths cannot be fully obtained through sensory experience alone. He replaced the Platonic ideas with the divine ideas that exist in the mind of God. When a person comes to know a truth, they are not recollecting a previous life, as in Plato, but are experiencing a process of divine illumination. God illuminates the human mind, allowing it to apprehend the eternal truths that are part of his eternal reason. This is a kind of Christianized version of anamnesis. Truth is not created by us, but is innate, not because we have seen it before, but because God has instilled it in us or illuminates our mind. Augustine also emphasized the inward search for truth, asserting that God is closer to us than we are to ourselves, and that truth is found in the depths of our soul. This resonates with the Platonic idea that knowledge is already within. Asterisk Medieval philosophy, the influence of Plato via Neoplatonism and Augustine can be traced throughout the Middle Ages. The idea that the soul has access to eternal truths, which are the source of divine knowledge, became fundamental for many scholastic philosophers. Although the emphasis shifted from recollection to divine illumination or infused ideas, the original Platonic idea of an internal source of knowledge remained alive. Asterisk the Renaissance and early modern period. During the Renaissance, there was a revival of interest in Plato, and the idea of anamnesis once again gained popularity among humanists. In the 17th century, rationalist philosophers such as René Descartes and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz revived the concept of innate ideas. Descartes believed that certain ideas, such as the idea of God, the idea of perfection, the idea of infinity, or even mathematical axioms, are innate and cannot be derived from experience. This is very similar to the Platonic idea that the soul already possesses this knowledge. Although Descartes did not speak of recollecting past lives, his concept of innate ideas is a direct descendant of Platonic anamnesis. Leibniz also argued that the mind is not a blank slate, but contains within itself innate principles and ideas in a latent, potential form. Learning, in his view, consists in the actualization of this potential knowledge. He used the metaphor of a block of marble that already has hidden veins within it, which determine the form the sculptor will give it. This is highly reminiscent of anamnesis, where external experience only awakens that which is already within. Modern philosophy and cognitive science. Even in contemporary philosophy and the cognitive sciences, one can find echoes of the idea of anamnesis, albeit in a completely different context. For example, some linguists and cognitive psychologists, such as Noam Chomsky, have proposed the idea of an innate universal grammar. They argue that children acquire language so quickly and easily because they are born with certain innate structures that guide language acquisition rather than simply learning it empirically. This is reminiscent of anamnesis, where certain knowledge is innate and is merely activated by external experience. The idea of intuitive knowledge, which is present in the work of many philosophers, also shares common features with anamnesis. When we suddenly see the solution to a problem or apprehend a truth without an obvious logical step, this could be interpreted as a form of inner recollection or the activation of innate knowledge. Thus, the idea of anamnesis has proven to be extraordinarily fruitful and resilient. It has traveled through the centuries, changing and adapting to new philosophical and religious systems, but always preserving its central essence, the idea that true knowledge is internal, not external, and that the soul holds within itself the potential for its awakening. This makes Plato's philosophy exceptionally relevant even in the modern world, prompting us to reflect on the sources of our knowledge and on the very depths of our own consciousness. We have traveled a significant path, immersing ourselves in the depths of Plato's concept of anamnesis, its origins, its justification, and its far-reaching consequences. However, like any profound philosophical idea, anamnesis is neither static nor unambiguous. Over the centuries, it has been subjected to various interpretations and stern critiques. Imagine a philosophical idea as a precious gemstone. Each facet reflects the light in its own way, and from different angles, it can appear entirely different. This is precisely what has happened with anamnesis, which has been perceived and interpreted differently by both the followers and the opponents of Plato. When Plato speaks of anamnesis, did he mean a literal recollection of events that happened to the soul in its previous existence in the world of ideas, or was he speaking more of an innate capacity of the soul to understand universal truths? This question has given rise to a multitude of interpretations, and the answer to it has significant consequences for understanding the entirety of Platonic philosophy. The literal recollection reincarnationist approach, the essence of the interpretation. This approach asserts that Plato genuinely believed in the transmigration of soul's metempsychosis, and that anasis is truly the recollection of specific memories of how the soul perceived the ideas before its incarnation in a body. In this sense, our mind contains an archive of knowledge from a prior disembodied existence. Arguments in favor. This interpretation relies on texts such as the myth of the charioteer, the Phaedrus, which describes in detail the soul's flight and its contemplation of the ideas before its fall, and certain fragments of the Phaedo, where Socrates speaks directly of knowledge acquired before birth. The experiment with the slave boy in the Meno can also be interpreted as a demonstration of just such a literal recollection, the boy remembers what he already knew. Asterisk consequences. If this is the case, then anamnesis is a mystical or metaphysical doctrine that requires a belief in the pre-existence of the soul and its direct contact with the ideas. This lends Platonism a strong mystical dimension and links it to Pythagorean and Orphic beliefs. Asterisk possible problems. This interpretation may seem overly dependent on mythological elements, which Plato often used for illustrative rather than literal purposes. It also raises the question of why most people do not remember these past lives in their contemplation of the ideas. The innate capacity, rationalist approach, asterisk the essence of the interpretation. This approach holds that anamnesis is not a literal memory, but rather points to an innate a priori capacity of the mind to apprehend universal and necessary truths. Knowledge of the ideas is built into the structure of the soul, not as specific memories, but as a potential for understanding. Asterisk arguments in favor. Proponents of this interpretation emphasize that Plato often used myths as allegories rather than as dogmatic statements. They highlight the rational aspect of Platonism. Knowledge of mathematical, logical, and moral truths is universal and does not depend on experience. The mind possesses certain categories or structures that allow it to formulate these truths. The experiment in the meno is then interpreted not as the recollection of specific events, but as the activation of innate rational faculties. Asterisk consequences. This interpretation makes anamnesis more down-to-earth and less mystical, connecting it to the concepts of innate ideas in later philosophers, such as Descartes and Leibniz. It focuses on the mind's capacity for independent cognition, independent of empirical experience. Asterisk possible problems. Some critics might object that such an interpretation does not fully account for the mystical and eschatological concerning the soul's fate, aspects that are clearly present in Plato's work. It also does not fully explain why this innate knowledge is not always accessible to us. The synthetic view. Many contemporary scholars of Plato are inclined to believe that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Plato, perhaps, did not draw a sharp line between the literal and the allegorical. His goal was not so much to present a scientific theory of memory as it was to substantiate the objectivity of knowledge and the immortality of the soul. Myths served him as powerful pedagogical and philosophical tools that allowed for the apprehension of deep truths that cannot be fully expressed through dry logic. Therefore, while a literal recollection may have been part of his beliefs, the central significance lies in the idea of the soul's innate capacity to apprehend the ideas, a capacity that is activated by certain methods. Despite its profundity and influence, the theory of anamnesis, like any other philosophical doctrine, has not been without its critics. Some objections are fundamental and concern the very essence of Plato's system, while others relate to its practical application or logical justifications. Asterisk the problem of proving the pre-existence of the soul and the world of ideas. Asterisk essence of the criticism. The primary objection is that Plato, in essence, presupposes the existence of the world of ideas and the pre-existence of the soul to explain anamnesis, and then uses anamnesis as proof of the existence of the world of ideas and the soul's immortality. This has the appearance of a circular argument petitio principii. He provides no independent evidence for these fundamental premises. Asterisk explanation. Critics argue that Plato does not prove that we could not have obtained knowledge of universal truths in some other way, for example, through abstraction from sensory experience or through innate structures of thought that do not require a past life. Asterisk the inadequate explanation of forgetting, asterisk essence of the criticism. If the soul truly contemplated the ideas in their pure form, why does it forget them upon incarnation? And why is this process of recollection so difficult and so uneven for different people? Plato does not provide a detailed psychological or physiological explanation for the mechanism of forgetting and subsequent recollection beyond general metaphors about the fall of the soul. Asterisk explanation. This objection concerns the absence of a clear mechanism that explains how exactly the transition from full knowledge to forgetting and then to gradual recollection takes place. Asterisk the lack of empirical grounding. Asterisk essence of the criticism. The theory of anamnesis is not supported by any empirical evidence. We have no conscious memories of past lives or of contemplating the ideas. Asterisk explanation. Although Plato was not seeking empirical proof in the modern sense, critics from a scientific standpoint consider his theory to be pure speculation. The experiment with the slave boy, while compelling from a philosophical perspective, is not a scientific proof. The boy could have derived the answer through logic rather than through recollection. Asterisk the problem of messy knowledge. Asterisk essence of the criticism. If the soul already possesses all knowledge, why can it not simply extract it upon request? Why are complex methods like dialectic necessary? And why is the process of cognition so arduous? If the knowledge is already there, why does it prove to be so messy and inaccessible? Asterisk explanation. This objection relates to the practical difficulties of anamnesis and calls into question its effectiveness as a universal explanation for cognition. Asterisk the elitism of knowledge. Asterisk essence of the criticism. The theory of anamnesis could lead to an elitism of knowledge. If true knowledge is only accessible to those who can recollect the ideas, for example, philosophers, then what does this mean for everyone else? It could be used to justify a social hierarchy where the knowing are superior to the ignorant. Asterisk explanation. This is an ethical and social objection that points to the potentially undemocratic nature of Plato's theory, although Plato himself may not have intended such an application. Asterisk alternative explanations. Asterisk essence of the criticism. Many philosophers, such as Aristotle and the empiricists, offer alternative explanations for the origin of universal concepts that do not require the pre-existence of the soul or a world of ideas. They argue that abstract ideas can be formed through the process of abstraction from sensory experience. For example, we see many individual trees, and from them we form the general concept of tree. Asterisk explanation. These alternative theories call into question the necessity of anamnesis to explain our knowledge of universals. Despite these criticisms, it is important to remember that Plato's aim was not merely to explain the phenomenon of knowledge, but to ground the existence of objective truth and morality in a world of constant change. His theory of anamnesis was part of a grand metaphysical system that attempted to give meaning to human existence and the striving for perfection. It forces us to contemplate the depths of our own consciousness and to wonder whether there is more hidden within us than we realize. As we conclude our journey through the world of anamnesis, we can see that this idea is not merely an archaic concept. It continues to stimulate reflection on the nature of knowledge, memory, consciousness, and ultimately on what it means to be human. It invites each of us to look inside ourselves and ask, is there something there that I already know but have forgotten? This question, echoing through the centuries, continues to inspire the quest of philosophy and the journey of self-discovery.